Belial, the worst fallen angel. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine this. You're standing in a vast, abandoned cathedral at midnight. The moonlight barely pierces through the shattered stained glass windows. The air is thick, suffocating, and every breath you take feels heavy with something ancient and malevolent. In the shadows, you sense a presence, something watching you, something that has been watching humanity since the very beginning. This isn't just any demon. This is Belial, the fallen angel so vile, so corrupt, that even among the ranks of hell, he stands apart as uniquely wicked. His name literally means worthlessness, lawlessness, destruction. And tonight, we're going to uncover why Belial might just be the most dangerous fallen angel to ever defy heaven. What makes one demon worse than another? Is it the body count, the scale of corruption? Or is it something far more insidious, something that attacks the very foundation of what makes us human? By the time we reach the end of this journey together, you'll understand why Belial has haunted religious texts, occult manuscripts, and the darkest corners of human consciousness for thousands of years. You'll learn about his origins in the celestial hierarchy, his catastrophic fall from grace, and the terrifying powers he wields in the modern world. But I have to warn you, once you truly understand what Belial represents, you might start seeing his influence everywhere around you. Before we dive deeper into the abyss, I need you to do something. If you're fascinated by the hidden realms of angels and demons, by the ancient cosmic war that shapes our reality, hit that subscribe button right now. We're building a community of truth seekers here, people who aren't afraid to look into the darkness to understand the light. And trust me, what we're about to explore goes far beyond anything you've heard in Sunday school. Now, let's begin at the very beginning, before the fall, before the corruption, when Belial was still counted among the hosts of heaven. In the countless eons before human memory, before the earth was formed and the stars were set in their courses, there existed a realm of pure light and divine order. Heaven, as we understand it, was not some fluffy cloud kingdom with golden harps. It was a vast cosmic hierarchy, a perfectly organized structure of celestial beings, each with their specific role in maintaining the universal order. At the top sat the throne of the divine, radiating incomprehensible light and power. And serving this throne were the angels, beings of pure energy and will, created for specific purposes in the grand design. The angelic host was divided into 9 choirs, 9 levels of celestial beings, each with increasing proximity to the divine presence. The lowest orders, the angels and archangels, interacted most directly with the material world and with humanity. Above them soared the principalities, powers, and virtues, governing nations, combating evil forces, and working miracles. Higher still were the dominions, thrones, and cherubim, regulating angelic duties and serving as living representations of divine justice. And at the very pinnacle were the seraphim, the burning ones, whose sole purpose was to ceaselessly worship and surround the throne itself. But here's where the story of Belial becomes particularly intriguing and deeply unsettling. Unlike many fallen angels whose pre-fall ranks we can trace with some certainty, Belial's original station remains shrouded in mystery and contradiction. Some ancient Hebrew texts suggest he was among the order of virtues, angels responsible for bestowing grace and valor, for inspiring human courage and divine miracles. Imagine that for a moment. An angel whose sacred duty was to uplift humanity, to bring out the noblest qualities in mortal souls, would eventually become the very embodiment of worthlessness and corruption. Other scholars and occult traditions place Belial even higher in the pre-fall hierarchy. The Dead Sea Scrolls, those ancient manuscripts discovered in caves near the Dead Sea, speak of Belial as a figure of such cosmic significance that he was considered a rival to the archangel Michael himself. In these texts, Belial is described as the angel of darkness, the prince of the domain of wickedness, suggesting he held considerable authority even while still counted among the faithful. What was Belial like before the fall? The texts give us tantalizing glimpses. He was beautiful beyond human comprehension, as all angels were, beings of living light whose very presence would overwhelm mortal senses. He was intelligent, cunning, gifted with a mind that could perceive and calculate across vast dimensions of reality. He had power, the ability to command lesser angels, to shape reality according to divine will, to move through the cosmos at the speed of thought. But somewhere in that perfect mind, something began to twist. Here's what most people don't understand about the fall of angels. It wasn't a sudden rebellion, not really. It was a gradual corruption, a slow turning away from divine purpose towards selfish desire. And with Belial, that corruption took a particularly insidious form. You see, Lucifer's rebellion, the great war in heaven that we often hear about, was rooted in pride. Lucifer, the light bringer, the most beautiful of all created beings, could not accept his position as created rather than creator. He wanted to be worshipped rather than to worship. His sin was cosmic arrogance, the desire to sit on the throne himself. And when he fell, he took a third of the angelic host with him, including many of the most powerful celestial beings. But Belial's corruption was different, and in many ways more disturbing. Ancient texts suggest that Belial's fall wasn't primarily about pride or a desire for worship. It was about something more fundamental, more corrosive to the very fabric of cosmic order. Belial rejected the concept of law itself, of structure, of objective morality and divine purpose. His name, as it appears in Hebrew scripture, literally translates to without worth, without a yoke, lawless one. He didn't just want to rule. He wanted to unmake, to corrupt, to prove that the divine order was arbitrary and meaningless. The Book of Jubilees, an ancient Jewish text, tells us that Belial was allowed by the divine to test humanity, to prove his dark philosophy that without the immediate presence of divine enforcement, all beings would choose chaos and selfishness. This makes Belial not just a rebel, but something far more dangerous, a cosmic prosecutor, an angel who believes that creation itself is flawed and must be exposed as such. When the great rebellion finally came, when Lucifer raised his banner and a third of heaven's host chose to follow him into exile, Belial was there. But even among the rebels, he was set apart. While Lucifer fought for a throne, Belial fought for the right to prove that thrones, laws, and order were illusions, temporary constructs that would inevitably crumble before the truth of chaos and worthlessness. The war in heaven, that cosmic conflict described in fragmented ways across multiple religious traditions, was beyond anything human minds can fully grasp. Imagine dimensions colliding, reality itself fracturing, beings of pure energy clashing with power that could unmake stars. The Archangel Michael, commander of the loyal host, led the forces of heaven against the rebels. And the battle raged across timeless moments, through spaces that existed beyond physical space. When the rebels finally fell, cast down from the heights of heaven, they plummeted through dimensions of reality, falling until they crashed into the lower realms, the places farthest from divine light. Lucifer, still magnificent even in defeat, established his throne in hell, creating a dark parody of the heavenly kingdom he had lost. The other fallen angels, now demons, took their places in this new hierarchy of darkness. But Belial, true to his nature, rejected even this structure. Yes, he is counted among the princes of hell. Yes, his name appears in demonic hierarchies and lists of infernal nobility. The Ars Goetia, that infamous grimoire of demons, doesn't list him among the 72 demons it catalogs, because Belial's status transcends such categorization. He appears instead in earlier, more primal texts, in the foundational documents of demonology where his power is acknowledged as distinct and particularly dangerous. In the hierarchy of hell as understood by medieval demonologists, Belial holds the rank of a king, ruling over 80 legions of demons. But his kingship is different from others. Where Lucifer rules through the promise of power and mammon through greed, Belial offers something more seductive and more corrosive. He offers freedom from all constraints, liberation from morality, law, and consequence. He is the demon who whispers that nothing matters, that all codes of conduct are arbitrary, that true freedom lies in embracing worthlessness. Now, you might be wondering, why does this matter? Why should we care about the rankings and roles of fallen angels? Here's why, and pay close attention, because this is where it gets really relevant to your life right now. Understanding what Belial represents, understanding his specific form of evil, helps us recognize his influence in the modern world. And trust me, that influence is everywhere once you know what to look for. But before we explore how Belial operates in today's world, we need to understand the powers he wields, the specific abilities and attributes that make him so dangerous. Because unlike some demons who specialize in one particular form of temptation or corruption, Belial's arsenal is vast and varied, making him one of the most versatile threats in the infernal hierarchy. Let me tell you about the powers of Belial, and I want you to really listen to this part, because what we're about to discuss isn't just ancient superstition or medieval fantasy. These are patterns of corruption that appear again and again throughout human history, that shape nations and topple empires, that destroy individuals and families. The ancients gave these patterns a name and a face. They called them Belial, but the reality they describe is as present today as it was 3,000 years ago. First and foremost, Belial is the master of lawlessness and moral corruption. This isn't just about breaking rules for the sake of breaking them. It's about something far more sophisticated and destructive. Belial works to erode the very concept of objective morality, to convince individuals, communities, and entire societies that right and wrong are merely social constructs, tools of control used by the powerful to dominate the weak. He whispers that every person should be their own ultimate authority, that authentic living means rejecting all external moral frameworks. Now, you might think, doesn't that just sound like modern individualism or moral relativism? Exactly. That's precisely the point. Belial's influence is so pervasive in contemporary culture that his core philosophy has been repackaged as enlightenment and personal freedom. The ancient rabbis who wrote about Belial in the Dead Sea Scrolls understood that his greatest weapon wasn't obvious evil, things like murder or theft that everyone recognizes as wrong, but rather the subtle corruption of moral categories themselves. In the War Scroll, one of the Dead Sea documents, Belial is described as the prince whose domain is darkness, whose every plan is for evil, and whose every intent is wicked. But notice how he operates. He doesn't just commit evil acts. He creates an entire domain, a realm of darkness where evil becomes normalized, where wickedness becomes invisible because the standards by which we judge wickedness have been erased. The second major power attributed to Belial is deception and the perversion of truth. The Testament of Solomon, a pseudepigraphical text from the 1st to 3rd century, describes how King Solomon summoned and bound various demons to question them about their powers and activities. When Belial appears before Solomon, he declares that he is one of the highest-ranking fallen angels, and that his primary activity is destroying through deception, causing worthy men to fall through twisted words and false promises. What makes Belial's deception so dangerous is its sophistication. He doesn't typically present obvious lies, blatant falsehoods that critical minds would immediately reject. Instead, he deals in half-truths, in context-free facts, in technically accurate statements that create entirely false impressions. He's the master of the misleading statistic, the selective quote, the expertly framed narrative that leads to wrong conclusions while using correct information. Think about how this plays out in the modern information landscape. We're drowning in data, in facts and figures and expert opinions, yet we've never been more confused about fundamental truths. Belial doesn't need to make people believe lies in the age of information. He just needs to make them believe that truth itself is unknowable, that everyone has their own truth, that objective reality is a myth. Once that foundation is eroded, he can lead people anywhere. The third aspect of Belial's power is his ability to inspire and amplify worthlessness and nihilism. His very name means worthless, and he has the unique ability to make people, even entire civilizations, feel the crushing weight of meaninglessness. Depression, despair, the sense that nothing matters and nothing has purpose. These are the calling cards of Belial's influence. He is the voice that whispers during your darkest moments that you have no value, that your life has no meaning, that the struggle isn't worth it. But here's what's truly insidious about this power. Belial doesn't just attack individuals with depression and suicidal ideation, though he certainly does that. He also attacks at the cultural level, working to create societies where meaninglessness becomes the default philosophical position. When civilizations lose their sense of transcendent purpose, when beauty becomes subjective and meaningless, when art descends into chaos and degradation, when children are raised without any sense of cosmic significance, that's Belial's fingerprint on history. The fourth power, particularly emphasized in occult grimoires and demonological texts, is Belial's ability to bestow political power and worldly success, but always with a terrible price. The Lesser Key of Solomon describes Belial as appearing in a chariot of fire, a being of such magnificence that even the magician attempting to summon him is warned to show proper respect. This demon offers political appointments, positions of authority, favor from powerful people, and worldly success. But everyone who accepts his gifts becomes corrupted, their success hollow, their power ultimately turned toward destructive ends. Throughout history, we see this pattern repeated. Leaders who rise to power through moral compromise, who achieve worldly success by abandoning principle, who gain everything but lose their souls, these are the ones who have, knowingly or unknowingly, made their pact with Belial. And the price is always the same: eventual destruction, taking down not just themselves, but often countless others who were unfortunate enough to follow them. The fifth major power is Belial's dominion over sexual corruption and the perversion of sacred intimacy. Multiple ancient texts, including the Book of Jubilees and various pseudepigraphal works, describe how Belial and his demons specifically target human sexuality, working to corrupt it, pervert it, and turn it from a sacred act of creation and union into something destructive and degrading. This isn't about the simple acknowledgement of sexual desire, which is natural and created. This is about the systematic corruption of intimacy into exploitation, addiction, and emptiness. In the modern world, this manifests in the pornography epidemic, in the hookup culture that leaves people emotionally devastated, in the trafficking and exploitation of the vulnerable, in the sexualization of children, in the corruption of innocence. Wherever sexuality becomes disconnected from love, commitment, and sacred purpose, wherever it becomes purely transactional, exploitative, or addictive, there you'll find Belial's influence. Now, before you think this is just prudish religious moralizing, consider the actual effects. Consider the epidemic of pornography addiction and its documented impacts on the brain. Consider the skyrocketing rates of depression and anxiety among young people in the hookup culture. Consider the absolute devastation of sex trafficking and exploitation. These aren't just moral failings, they're public health crises, and they all stem from the corruption of something sacred into something worthless, which is literally Belial's signature. The sixth power that ancient texts attribute to Belial is his ability to incite violence, particularly unjust violence, violence without purpose or nobility. While war itself is not necessarily his domain, that's more the territory of other demons, senseless violence, violence for its own sake, violence rooted in nihilism and worthlessness. That's Belial's handiwork. School shooters who attack because they see no value in life, including their own. Terrorists who kill not for any genuine political aim, but because destruction itself has become their purpose. Random acts of violence that seem to have no motive, these often bear Belial's mark. And seventh, perhaps most relevant for our current moment in history, Belial is the demon of division and the destruction of community. The Community Rule, another Dead Sea Scroll document, describes Belial as working to create enmity among people, to destroy the bonds that hold communities together, to isolate individuals from the support structures that give life meaning and protection from evil. He thrives on broken families, fractured communities, polarized societies where people see each other as enemies rather than as fellow travelers in the human experience. Look around at the modern world. We've never been more connected technologically, yet we've never been more isolated emotionally. Families are fractured. Communities have dissolved. People live next to each other for years without knowing each other's names. Political polarization has reached the point where people can't maintain friendships across ideological lines. Mental health crises are skyrocketing, particularly among the young who have grown up in this fragmented landscape. This is Belial's playground, a society where individuals are isolated, communities are destroyed, and shared meaning has evaporated. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. This sounds paranoid. This sounds like attributing every social problem to some ancient demon rather than acknowledging complex sociological factors. And you're right to be skeptical. The world is complex. Social problems have multiple causes. But here's what I'm asking you to consider. What if the name Belial is simply what the ancients called a very real pattern, a recurring set of destructive forces that manifest throughout human history? What if these patterns are so consistent, so recognizable, that it's actually useful to personify them, to understand them as if they were an intelligence working with purpose and intent? Because here's the thing, whether you believe in literal demons or not, the patterns are real. The destruction is real. And understanding these patterns, knowing how they work, recognizing them when they appear, that's essential for protecting yourself, your family, and your community from their effects. But we're not done yet. Not even close. Because the most disturbing aspect of Belial isn't just his powers or his methods. It's how he appears throughout human history, the specific moments when his influence becomes undeniable, the civilizations he's corrupted, and the individuals he's destroyed. And that's where we're going next. Let's talk about Belial's fingerprints on human history, because once you understand his methods, you start seeing them everywhere. And I need to warn you, this section is going to challenge some of what you think you know about historical events and cultural movements. But stay with me, because understanding this is crucial. The first major appearance of Belial in recorded human history comes in the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament. His name appears multiple times, and each instance is instructive. In Deuteronomy, the text warns against the sons of Belial, worthless men who lead cities astray into idolatry and away from divine law. In Judges, the story of Gibeah involves sons of Belial committing horrific sexual violence that leads to civil war among the tribes of Israel. In Samuel, the corrupt priests Hophni and Phinehas are called sons of Belial because they exploited their religious authority for personal gain and sexual gratification. Notice the pattern? Sons of Belial aren't just random bad people. They're specifically those who corrupt sacred things, who abuse positions of trust, who lead communities away from truth and toward destruction. They're the teachers who corrupt their students, the priests who exploit their congregations, the leaders who betray their people, the parents who damage their children. These are the sons of Belial, people who have either knowingly or unknowingly become channels for his corrupting influence. But it's in the Dead Sea Scrolls where we really see Belial's role in cosmic history laid out in detail. The War Scroll describes an apocalyptic final battle between the sons of light and the sons of darkness, with Belial as the prince commanding the forces of darkness. This isn't just a metaphor. According to the scroll, it's a literal cosmic war playing out both in the spiritual realm and in human history. Every act of human righteousness is a victory for the sons of light. Every act of corruption and lawlessness is a victory for Belial and his forces. The community rule is even more specific. It describes how Belial has been given temporary dominion over the world, allowed to test humanity, to tempt them toward wickedness, to prove his dark philosophy that beings will choose chaos over order when given the choice. The document warns that Belial works through specific strategies, including leading people astray through false teaching, corrupting sexuality and family structures, promoting violence and division, and most importantly, making evil appear as good and good appear as evil. This last point is crucial. Belial doesn't typically present himself as an obvious villain. He comes as a liberator, as an enlightener, as the one who will free you from oppressive rules and outdated morality. He's the voice that says the old ways are chains, that traditional morality is a tool of control, that real freedom means rejecting all external authority and being your own ultimate guide. And millions of people throughout history have heard that voice and thought they were choosing freedom when they were actually choosing slavery to chaos and worthlessness. In the New Testament, Belial appears in Paul's second letter to the Corinthians, where he's contrasted directly with Christ. Paul asks, what accord has Christ with Belial? The Greek word used there is Belial, a variation of Belial, and the question is rhetorical. There is no accord, no agreement, no compatibility. Christ represents order, meaning, purpose, self-sacrifice, and love. Belial represents chaos, worthlessness, selfishness, and the corruption of all that is sacred. They are diametrically opposed. This is important to understand. In Christian theology, the cosmic conflict isn't primarily between God and Lucifer, though that's certainly part of it. The deeper conflict is between the principle of divine order, meaning, and purpose, represented by Christ, and the principle of chaos, worthlessness, and corruption, represented by Belial. Every human being, every society, every civilization is caught in this cosmic tension, constantly pulled between these two opposing forces. Throughout the medieval period, Belial's prominence in demonology only grew. The grimoires, those books of magical rituals and demon summoning, consistently rank Belial among the most powerful and dangerous of all infernal beings. The Lemegeton or Lesser Key of Solomon describes him as a mighty and powerful king, created next after Lucifer, the first fallen angel after Satan himself. He appears in a chariot of fire, beautiful and dignified, speaking with a pleasant voice. But the text warns that everything about him is deception, a beautiful exterior covering absolute corruption. What's particularly interesting about the medieval understanding of Belial is how his corruption manifests. While other demons might tempt people with specific sins, greed or lust or pride, Belial works at a more fundamental level. He attacks the very concept of sin itself. He convinces people that the categories of right and wrong are arbitrary, that morality is subjective, that there is no cosmic justice or divine law to which we're accountable. Once that foundation is eroded, all specific sins become easy because there's no longer any framework for understanding them as wrong. The infamous witch hunts of the early modern period, tragic as they were, reveal something important about how people understood Belial's operation. Accused witches were often charged with making pacts with Belial specifically, rather than other demons, when their alleged crimes involved corrupting children, attacking family structures, or promoting lawlessness and chaos in communities. While we now know that most accused witches were innocent victims of mass hysteria, the charges themselves reveal what medieval people feared most about Belial: his ability to corrupt the innocent, destroy families, and undermine the foundations of civilization. Moving into the modern era, we start to see Belial's influence in more subtle but no less destructive forms. The 20th century, despite its technological progress and democratic revolutions, was also the bloodiest in human history. And if you look at the ideologies that caused that bloodshed, you see Belial's philosophy woven throughout. The totalitarian movements of the 20th century, both fascist and communist, despite their apparent differences, shared certain characteristics that mark them as manifestations of Belial's influence. They rejected objective moral law in favor of political expediency. They destroyed traditional community structures and family bonds, replacing them with absolute loyalty to the state. They promoted a kind of nihilism where human life had no intrinsic value, only instrumental value based on contribution to the political project. They systematically corrupted language and truth, making words mean whatever the party needed them to mean. And they specifically targeted anything sacred, persecuting religious believers and attempting to create a purely materialistic society where transcendent meaning was impossible. This wasn't just political evil. This was Belial's philosophy implemented at scale. This was worthlessness, lawlessness, and the corruption of meaning elevated to the level of state policy. And the result was predictable. Over 100 million dead in wars, purges, and genocides. Entire generations traumatized. The complete breakdown of trust within societies. The legacy of which we're still living with today. But here's where it gets really uncomfortable, because I need to talk about how Belial's influence manifests in modern Western society, including in the supposedly free and enlightened nations. And this is where a lot of people get defensive because it hits close to home. Look at the sexual revolution of the 1960s and its aftermath. On the surface, it was about freedom, about throwing off oppressive Victorian morality, about letting people love who they want and express themselves authentically. And certainly some of the specific changes were positive, reducing stigma around certain issues, giving people more autonomy over their choices. But look at the overall pattern. Look at what actually happened when sexuality was completely disconnected from any framework of meaning, commitment, or sacred purpose. We got the hookup culture where intimacy became purely transactional and left people emotionally devastated. We got pornography that went from hidden and shameful to ubiquitous and normalized, creating an epidemic of addiction that destroys relationships and rewires brains. We got skyrocketing rates of sexually transmitted diseases. We got broken families, with children growing up without stable two-parent homes in unprecedented numbers. We got the objectification and exploitation of women reaching new heights, even as feminism supposedly advanced. We got sex trafficking becoming a multi-billion-dollar global industry. We got children being sexualized at younger and younger ages. That's not freedom. That's not enlightenment. That's corruption. That's taking something sacred and beautiful, human sexuality as an expression of intimate bonding and creative power, and turning it into something worthless, empty, addictive, and destructive. That's literally Belial's signature. Or consider the broader cultural shift toward moral relativism and the rejection of objective truth. We're now living in a society where the idea that there are objective moral facts, that some things are actually right and some things are actually wrong regardless of personal opinion or cultural context, is considered naive or even oppressive. We're told that everyone has their own truth, that morality is just personal preference, that the only real sin is judging someone else's choices. This sounds progressive and tolerant on the surface, but think about what it actually means. If there's no objective right and wrong, then there's no basis for justice, no grounds for condemning genuine evil, no foundation for human rights, because rights are based on the idea that humans have inherent worth and dignity, which is a metaphysical claim about objective value. No reason to sacrifice for others or for noble causes, because there are no noble causes, just personal preferences. This is Belial's ultimate goal, not to make people obviously evil, but to erode the very categories of good and evil until they become meaningless. And once that's accomplished, once a society has fully embraced the idea that nothing is objectively right or wrong, that there's no transcendent meaning or purpose, that individuals are the ultimate authority on their own truth, then that society is ripe for corruption at every level. We see it in the breakdown of institutional trust. Government, media, science, education, religious institutions, all of them have lost credibility with large portions of the population because they've been caught lying, manipulating, serving their own interests rather than truth or the common good. That's not to say these institutions are entirely corrupt or that all criticism is valid, but the pattern is undeniable. When you reject objective truth and moral law, when you embrace the idea that the ends justify the means, when you make pragmatism and power your only guides, corruption becomes inevitable. We see it in the mental health crisis, particularly among young people. Depression, anxiety, suicide, all at unprecedented levels. And yes, there are multiple contributing factors, but at the core is a crisis of meaning. When you grow up in a society that tells you nothing means anything, that your life has no cosmic significance, that you're just an accidental arrangement of atoms in a meaningless universe, that there's no purpose or destiny or transcendent value, is it any wonder that depression and despair become epidemic? We see it in the destruction of community and the rise of isolation. Bowling alone, as the sociologist Robert Putnam described it. People disconnected from family, from neighbors, from civic organizations, from religious communities, from any structure larger than themselves. And technology, which promised to connect us, has in many ways made it worse, giving us the illusion of connection while leaving us more isolated than ever. Belial thrives in isolation because isolated individuals are vulnerable, easily manipulated, unable to resist cultural currents, lacking the support structures that give life meaning and protection. And we see it in the coarsening of culture, the descent into vulgarity, cynicism, and nihilism. Art that shocks rather than uplifts. Entertainment that numbs rather than inspires. Humor that destroys rather than celebrates. A public discourse so toxic that many decent people have simply withdrawn from civic engagement. This isn't just about taste or personal preference. This is about a society losing its ability to perceive and create beauty, losing its sense that some things are worthy and noble and deserve respect. Now, am I saying that every social problem in the modern world is because of a demon named Belial? No, that's not the point. Human beings have agency. We make choices. Society is complex. Problems have multiple causes. But what I am saying is that there are patterns of corruption and destruction that appear again and again throughout human history. Patterns so consistent that the ancients personified them, gave them a name, understood them as an intelligence working with purpose. Whether you believe in literal demons or not, whether you think Belial is an actual fallen angel or a useful metaphor for destructive social patterns, the practical result is the same. There are forces, ideas, cultural currents that lead toward life, meaning, beauty, truth, love, and community. And there are forces that lead toward death, meaninglessness, ugliness, deception, exploitation, and isolation. The ancients called the second set of forces Belial, and they warned that choosing to align with those forces, even in the name of freedom or progress, leads inevitably to destruction. But here's the good news, and I need you to hear this because it's crucial. Understanding how Belial operates, recognizing his fingerprints, seeing through his deceptions, that's half the battle. Once you can see the pattern, once you understand the strategy, you can resist it. You can choose differently. You can build your life on a different foundation. And that's what we need to talk about next. How do you protect yourself from Belial's influence? How do you recognize when you're being led toward worthlessness and chaos? How do you resist the cultural currents that pull toward his philosophy? How do you build a life of meaning and purpose in a world increasingly dominated by meaninglessness? Protection from Belial isn't about magical rituals or special prayers, though prayer certainly has its place. It's about understanding his methodology and building your life in direct opposition to his principles. It's about recognizing the lies he tells and armoring yourself with truth. So let's break this down practically. The first and most important defense is to root yourself firmly in the reality of objective truth and objective moral value. This is the foundation of everything else. You have to be absolutely convinced, down to your core, that truth exists, that right and wrong are real, that meaning is not just something we invent, but something we discover. Because once you accept the premise that all truth and morality are relative, that nothing is objectively meaningful, you've already lost. You've accepted Belial's core philosophy, and everything else follows inevitably from that. This doesn't mean you have to be certain about every truth claim or every moral question. Humility is important. There are things we don't know, moral dilemmas with no easy answers. But the existence of difficult cases doesn't negate the existence of clear cases. The fact that there are twilight moments doesn't mean day and night don't exist. Murder is wrong. Child abuse is wrong. Exploitation of the vulnerable is wrong. Love is better than hate. Truth is better than lies. Beauty is better than ugliness. These aren't just opinions. They're objective facts about reality, and your willingness to affirm them boldly is your first line of defense. Second, cultivate meaningful connections and commit to community. Remember, Belial thrives on isolation. He wants you disconnected, alone, vulnerable. So the antidote is to do the exact opposite. Build real relationships. Not social media connections, real friendships where people know you, where you're accountable, where you have mutual obligations and support. Commit to a faith community, even if you have doubts, even if it's imperfect. Join civic organizations. Know your neighbors. Invest in your family relationships. Create bonds that matter, bonds that will hold you when the cultural currents try to sweep you away. This is hard in the modern world. It requires time and energy. It means being vulnerable. It means dealing with people who annoy you or disagree with you. It means commitment and sacrifice. But this is precisely why it's so important. Easy connections aren't real connections. The bonds that actually protect and sustain you are the ones that cost you something, that require you to show up, that make you part of something larger than yourself. Third, actively resist nihilism and cultivate a sense of transcendent meaning. This is the direct counter to Belial's core message of worthlessness. You need to be convinced that your life has cosmic significance, that what you do matters, that you're part of a grand narrative much larger than yourself. This doesn't mean you have to believe you're specially chosen for some great destiny, though maybe you are. It means believing that the mundane choices you make every day, to be kind or cruel, honest or deceptive, courageous or cowardly, that these choices matter eternally, that they're shaping not just your life, but the moral fabric of the universe. For religious believers, this comes naturally from faith in a God who cares about every sparrow that falls, who numbers the hairs on your head, who sees every act of kindness and every sacrifice. But even if you're not religious, you can cultivate this sense of cosmic significance. You can recognize that your actions ripple outward, affecting others in ways you'll never fully see. You can understand that meaning is not something you create arbitrarily, but something you participate in by aligning yourself with truth, beauty, goodness, and love. Fourth, practice radical honesty with yourself and others. Belial is the father of lies, the master of deception. So truth-telling becomes a spiritual discipline, a form of resistance. This means refusing to lie, even when it's convenient. It means being honest about your own failures and limitations rather than hiding behind a false persona. It means calling things by their real names, refusing to participate in the corruption of language where evil is called good and good is called evil. This is costly. Honesty can lose you opportunities. It can create conflict. It can make you unpopular. But it's essential because every time you tell the truth, especially when it's difficult, you're striking a blow against Belial's kingdom. You're creating a small island of clarity in a sea of deception. And if enough people do this consistently, those islands start to connect, start to form a solid ground on which genuine community and meaning can be built. Fifth, guard your sexuality and understand it as sacred rather than merely recreational. This is uncomfortable to talk about in the modern context because we've been so thoroughly conditioned to see any sexual restraint as repressive and unhealthy. But the evidence is overwhelming. When sexuality is treated as purely recreational, when it's disconnected from commitment, meaning, and love, it becomes destructive. Pornography addicts know this. People devastated by hookup culture know this. Children of broken homes know this. Victims of sexual exploitation definitely know this. The antidote is to reclaim a sacred understanding of sexuality, to see it as a powerful force that bonds people, that creates life, that expresses the deepest intimacy, and that therefore must be treated with appropriate reverence and restraint. This doesn't mean being prudish or sex negative. It means understanding that something's power is directly related to the damage it can do if misused. Fire is wonderful, but you don't play with it carelessly. Sixth, actively seek beauty and create beauty in your sphere of influence. Belial wants to create a world of ugliness, cynicism, and degradation because beauty points beyond itself to transcendent meaning. When you encounter something truly beautiful, a piece of music, a natural landscape, a work of art, an act of heroism or kindness, you have an immediate intuition that life means something, that there's more to existence than atoms and void. Beauty is a window into transcendence. So surround yourself with beauty, not in a superficial or consumerist way, but in a way that feeds your soul. Listen to music that uplifts rather than degrades. Read books that inspire rather than cynically tear down. Spend time in nature. Create art, even if you're not talented, because the act of creating beauty is itself meaningful. Make your home beautiful, not necessarily expensive or trendy, but reflecting care and order and taste. Dress with dignity. Speak with grace. Let your life be an act of aesthetic resistance against the ugliness that Belial promotes. Seventh, embrace discipline and reject the lie that freedom means absence of constraint. Belial promises freedom through lawlessness, liberation through the rejection of all rules and structures. But anyone who's tried to learn a skill knows that discipline is what creates real freedom. The musician who practices scales for thousands of hours gains the freedom to create beautiful music. The athlete who submits to rigorous training gains the freedom to perform at high levels. The student who accepts academic discipline gains the freedom that comes from knowledge. Apply this principle across your life. Create structures. Set boundaries. Practice self-control, not because you're oppressed or because some external authority demands it, but because discipline creates the space within which meaningful freedom can exist. Wake up at consistent times. Exercise regularly. Control your consumption of entertainment and social media. Keep your word. Meet your obligations. These practices build character, and character is what allows you to be free in the ways that actually matter. Eighth, be extremely cautious about moral compromise, especially in pursuit of success or power. Remember, Belial offers worldly success, but always at a terrible price. The price is your integrity, your soul, your ultimate destruction. So when you're tempted to compromise your principles for advancement, when you're told that you have to play the game to succeed, when you're assured that everyone does it and you'd be foolish not to, that's when you need to be most vigilant. This doesn't mean being stupidly inflexible or failing to navigate complex situations with wisdom. It means identifying the lines you will not cross, the principles you will not violate, no matter what the cost, and then holding those lines absolutely. Because every time you hold a line against pressure to compromise, you become stronger. Your character becomes more solid. You become less vulnerable to corruption. But every time you cross a line, telling yourself it's just this once, just to get ahead, just because everyone else is doing it, you become weaker, more corruptible, more aligned with Belial's kingdom. Ninth, cultivate gratitude and actively resist the temptation toward resentment and bitterness. Belial wants you focused on what's wrong, what's unfair, what you lack, what's been taken from you. He wants you nursing grievances and bitterness because these poison the soul and make joy impossible. The antidote is deliberate gratitude, not as a naive pretense that everything is fine, but as a spiritual practice of recognizing the good that exists even amid difficulty. This is hard, especially if you've genuinely experienced injustice or suffering. But bitterness doesn't heal wounds, it prevents healing. Gratitude, on the other hand, opens you to joy, connects you to others, gives you energy for positive action, and inoculates you against the nihilistic despair that Belial promotes. So practice it daily. Literally make a list of things you're grateful for. Thank people. Acknowledge the good in your life. Let it be real, not forced, but be intentional about noticing and appreciating. 10th, and this is crucial, be willing to suffer for what's right. Belial's ultimate appeal is to comfort and ease. He promises that if you just go along with the cultural current, if you just compromise a little, if you just keep your head down and don't make waves, life will be easier. And he's right, in the short term at least. Taking a stand is costly. Living with integrity is difficult. Swimming against the cultural current is exhausting. But the alternative is worse. The alternative is a life of increasing compromise, where you trade your soul piece by piece for temporary comfort, until you wake up one day and realize you've become someone you despise, that you've wasted the precious gift of your existence on worthless things. Better to suffer for what's right, to pay the price that integrity demands, to endure the difficulty that comes from taking a stand, because at least then you keep your soul. At least then your life means something. At least then you can face yourself in the mirror and the divine at the end of your days without shame. Now let me address something important. Some of you are thinking, this all sounds exhausting. This sounds like a prescription for joyless, rigid, judgmental living. Who wants to be constantly on guard, constantly resisting, constantly fighting cultural currents? Where's the joy? Where's the fun? Where's the freedom? But here's what you need to understand. True joy, deep abiding joy, doesn't come from giving in to every impulse or going with every flow. It comes from living with integrity, from building something meaningful, from being part of something larger than yourself, from knowing that your life stands for something. The pleasure that Belial offers, the freedom from constraint, the liberation from moral law, it feels good in the moment, but it leaves you empty. It's cotton candy, sweet for a second, but utterly without nourishment, leaving you more hungry than before. The path I'm describing, building your life on truth, committing to community, seeking meaning, practicing integrity, it's hard, but it's deeply satisfying. It's the difference between junk food and a nourishing meal. It's the difference between a one-night stand and a lifelong marriage. It's the difference between the quick high of a drug and the deep satisfaction of accomplishment. Belial offers you slavery and calls it freedom. The path of resistance offers you difficulty and delivers genuine liberation. But there's one more thing we need to discuss before we close, and it's the most important thing of all. What's the ultimate answer to Belial? What's the power that can definitively defeat the Prince of Worthlessness? Because knowing the enemy is important, building defenses is important, but we need more than that. We need an ultimate hope, a final victory, a definitive answer to the question that Belial poses to the universe. The question that Belial poses to the cosmos is this: does anything actually matter? Is there any real meaning, any objective value, any ultimate purpose? Or is it all just arbitrary, temporary, destined to end in heat, death, and meaninglessness? Is the universe fundamentally absurd, as the existentialists suggested? Or is there something more, some deeper reality that gives existence meaning? This is the ultimate question, and how you answer it determines everything about how you live, what you value, what you're willing to sacrifice for, how you treat others, what you hope for. Belial's answer is clear: nothing matters, everything is worthless, lawlessness is truth, chaos is reality. And if he's right, if that's the true nature of existence, then his philosophy makes perfect sense. Why not pursue pleasure without constraint? Why not seek power without moral limitation? Why not embrace nihilism and live for the moment, since nothing endures anyway? But there's another answer, an ancient answer, one that has sustained billions of people across millennia and cultures. The answer is that meaning is not just real, but is the fundamental fabric of reality itself. That the universe is not an accident, but a creation, designed with purpose, infused with value. That human beings are not cosmic accidents, but bear the image of the divine, having inherent worth and dignity that no circumstance can remove. That love is not just a chemical reaction, but the ultimate force holding reality together. That beauty, truth, and goodness are not subjective preferences, but objective realities to which we respond. In the Jewish and Christian traditions, this answer takes a very specific form. The Old Testament prophets proclaimed that the God who created the universe is not distant or indifferent, but intimately involved with creation, particularly with humanity. That this God has a purpose for history, a direction toward which all things are moving. That evil and chaos, represented by figures like Belial, are real but temporary, allowed for a season to test and refine, but destined for ultimate defeat. And then came the New Testament claim, which is either the most important truth ever proclaimed or the most audacious lie, depending on whether it's true. The claim that the divine creator became human, entered into history as Jesus of Nazareth, lived a perfect life in alignment with divine law and purpose, and then willingly went to a cross. That this crucifixion was not just a tragic execution, but a cosmic event where the power of meaninglessness, sin, death, and chaos was broken. Where the ultimate sacrifice was made to demonstrate that love is stronger than death, that meaning is more fundamental than chaos, that worthlessness is not the final word. And then came the resurrection, the claim that death itself was defeated, that Jesus rose bodily from the grave, proving that meaning and purpose will ultimately triumph over nihilism and decay. That the universe is not winding down toward heat, death, and meaninglessness, but being drawn toward a final consummation where all things will be made new, where evil will be finally and completely defeated, where the sons of light will triumph over Belial and all the forces of darkness. Now, I know not everyone watching this accepts these claims. Some of you are from different religious traditions with your own answers to the question of ultimate meaning. Some of you are skeptics who think all religious claims are equally unfounded. And that's fine. I'm not here to force belief on anyone. But I am here to tell you that you need an answer to Belial's question. You need something to stand on, some foundation that can support the weight of living meaningfully in a world full of suffering and chaos. Because here's what I've observed. People who try to live without any ultimate meaning, who fully embrace the idea that nothing objectively matters, they don't actually live that way. They can't. They continue to act as if things matter, as if love is better than hate, as if justice is important, as if their own lives and the lives of others have value. They're living on borrowed moral capital, using concepts like rights and dignity and meaning that make no sense in a purely materialist, meaningless universe. The honest nihilist, the person who fully accepts Belial's answer and lives it out consistently, that person becomes a monster or goes mad or commits suicide. Because you cannot actually live as if nothing matters without destroying yourself and probably others in the process. The fact that most people don't do this, the fact that even self-proclaimed nihilists act as if meaning exists, that suggests something profound about the nature of reality. We're built for meaning. We're designed to perceive value, to recognize beauty, to respond to love, to seek purpose. These aren't just evolutionary adaptations or social constructs. They're how we're wired at the deepest level. And that wiring points to something real, something beyond us, something that grounds and justifies the intuitions we can't escape even if we wanted to. So here's my challenge to you as we near the end of this journey together. Take seriously the question that Belial poses. Does your life matter? Do your choices carry real weight? Is there objective meaning and purpose to existence? Don't just accept the default answer of your culture, whether that's casual nihilism or unexamined religiosity. Really grapple with it. Look at the evidence. Consider the alternatives. And then make a choice. Because whether you acknowledge it or not, you're already choosing. Every day, in how you live, in what you value, in how you treat others, you're answering the question. You're either aligning yourself with meaning, purpose, truth, beauty, and love, or you're aligning yourself with chaos, worthlessness, deception, ugliness, and exploitation. There's no neutral ground. The ancient texts understood this. You're either with the sons of light or the sons of darkness. You're either building on the foundation of Christ or on the foundation of Belial. You're either creating meaning or embracing worthlessness. And yes, everyone fails. Everyone falls short. Everyone makes choices they regret. The point isn't to be perfect. The point is to orient yourself toward what's true and good and meaningful. And when you fall, to get back up, confess the failure, make amends where possible, and keep moving forward. That's what spiritual warfare actually looks like. Not dramatic exorcisms and mystical rituals, though those have their place, but the daily choice to align with light rather than darkness, with meaning rather than chaos, with love rather than exploitation. One final thought before we close. Understanding Belial, really understanding him, is both terrifying and liberating. It's terrifying because you start seeing his influence everywhere, recognizing the patterns of corruption and chaos in your own life, in your culture, in institutions you trusted. It can make the world seem darker, more dangerous, more hopeless. But it's also liberating because it gives you clarity. It helps you understand what's happening around you and within you. It shows you that the struggles you face, the temptations, the cultural pressures, the sense of meaninglessness, these aren't just random. They're part of a larger pattern, an ancient conflict. And understanding the pattern helps you resist it. More than that, it reminds you that you're not alone. That countless people throughout history have faced the same enemy, grappled with the same questions, made the same choice to align with meaning rather than chaos. That you're part of an ancient community of resistance, the Sons of Light as the Dead Sea Scrolls called them, people who refused to accept Belial's dark gospel of worthlessness and who instead build their lives on the foundation of transcendent meaning. So stand firm, build on truth, connect with community, seek beauty, practice integrity, resist the temptation to compromise, and most importantly, remember that worthlessness is the lie. You matter. Your choices matter. Your life has cosmic significance. The universe is not meaningless chaos, but a creation infused with purpose and moving toward ultimate redemption. Belial is powerful. He's ancient. He's cunning. His influence is vast, and his corruption runs deep. But he's not ultimate. He's not eternal. And he's already been defeated by a power greater than himself, a love stronger than death, a meaning deeper than chaos. Your job is simply to choose which side you're on, and then live that choice out with courage and consistency. We've covered a lot of ground today. We've traced Belial from his origins in the celestial hierarchy through his catastrophic fall from grace. We've examined his powers, his methods, his fingerprints throughout human history. We've looked at how his influence manifests in the modern world, in cultural trends and social patterns. And we've discussed how to protect yourself, how to resist, how to build a life of meaning in opposition to his gospel of worthlessness. But knowledge without action is useless. So here's what I want you to do right now. First, take a moment and reflect honestly. Where in your life have you compromised with Belial's philosophy? Where have you accepted the lie that nothing objectively matters, that all morality is relative, that freedom means rejecting all constraint? Where have you pursued pleasure, power, or comfort at the expense of integrity? I'm not asking you to share this with anyone, just to be honest with yourself, because you can't change what you won't acknowledge. Second, identify one concrete area where you're going to take a stand. Maybe it's committing to absolute honesty, even when it's costly. Maybe it's ending a relationship or situation that's corrupting you. Maybe it's finally joining a community and making those commitments you've been avoiding. Maybe it's setting boundaries around your consumption of pornography or social media or whatever else is feeding the chaos in your soul. Pick one thing, something specific and measurable, and commit to it. Write it down. Tell someone who will hold you accountable. And then do it, not because it's easy, but because it's right. Third, if you found value in this exploration, share it. Not because I need the views, though I won't pretend that doesn't matter, but because other people need to hear this. We're living in a culture saturated with Belial's influence, and most people don't even recognize it. They're being swept along by cultural currents they don't understand toward destinations they wouldn't choose if they could see clearly. Sharing this video, having conversations about these ideas, that's how we push back. That's how we create islands of clarity in the sea of deception. And fourth, subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell. We're going to continue exploring the hidden realms of angels and demons, the cosmic warfare that shapes our reality, the ancient wisdom that modern culture has forgotten. Each video builds on the others, creating a comprehensive understanding of the spiritual dimension of existence. You don't want to miss what's coming next. Before we go, let me leave you with this final thought. The story of Belial is ultimately a story about choice. He chose to rebel against divine order and embrace worthlessness. And every day, in ways large and small, we're making that same choice. We're either building meaning or embracing chaos. We're either aligned with truth or with deception. We're either creating beauty or settling for ugliness. The difference between us and Belial is that our choices aren't final. We can change direction. We can turn back toward the light. We can rebuild on a proper foundation. It's never too late, as long as you're still breathing, to reject worthlessness and embrace meaning, to turn away from chaos and align with purpose. So make that choice. Make it today. Make it right now. Choose meaning over worthlessness. Choose truth over deception. Choose beauty over ugliness. Choose love over exploitation. Choose life over death. And then make that choice again tomorrow, and the next day, and every day after that until it becomes who you are at the deepest level. The war between light and darkness is real. The cosmic conflict between meaning and chaos continues. And you, whether you realize it or not, are a participant. The only question is which side you're fighting for. Thank you for joining me on this deep dive into one of the darkest figures in angelology and demonology. If this video challenged you, disturbed you, or opened your eyes to realities you hadn't considered before, leave a comment below. Tell me what resonated with you. Tell me what questions you still have. Tell me what topics you want us to explore next. And remember, understanding the darkness is important, but it's not the end goal. The end goal is living in the light, building lives of meaning and purpose that stand as monuments of resistance against the gospel of worthlessness. That's how we defeat Belial. Not through dramatic spiritual warfare or mystical rituals, but through the daily choice to live with integrity, to seek truth, to create beauty, to love sacrificially, and to build meaning in a world that desperately needs it. Go now and be a light in the darkness. Be a voice for truth in a culture of deception. Be a builder of meaning in an age of nihilism. Be one of the sons of light in the eternal conflict against the sons of darkness. Your life matters. Your choices matter. And the world needs you to live like it's true. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay faithful, and keep seeking truth.